Hey everyone. After a small little break last week for Cecil, which I still think was... Cecil was a good tank, don't get me wrong. And I still kind of regret not doing his review, but it just didn't work out. So today we are looking at our latest global JP unit. Not designed by Alum, but it pretty much has all the red flags that Alum usually has. It's Elegant Temptress Lilith, the latest Halloween unit. Let's check her out. So, like I mentioned, she is an SLB unit. Dual role, has the physical tanking slot first, which is very, very weird in my opinion. And the attacker role for that SLB/LB, which deal damage and supposedly do some tanking stuff. But we'll get to that in a moment. So the example abilities, I picked out 3 because I do have other abilities picked for the actual overview. So Veil of Night is something that I would call a cool idea with bad execution. So what it does is it decreases dark resistance to herself by 100%, which is fine because she also absorbs dark and adds dark element to the boss, which is nice. I like the idea of it. Esther has something similar without the boss's imbue, which is technically better because in that case, when you're omni covering, say with Esther, she's the only one to get hit and absorbs, and the rest of the team doesn't really need any lightning resistance. With this, if the boss has anything that, for example, ignores your omni cover, your party still gets hit, and you are technically forced to use dark resistance on the party. Now she has that in her kit with Bardark Jah, I believe is the name, so it's a non-issue. Still, while the idea is pretty good, the execution isn't perfect. We do have another unit that does this similarly to this. It's Kresnik. Kresnik has the best of the 3 versions, so comparing Lilith, Esther, and Kresnik. Kresnik is the best in this case. He imbues both parties, amps your own party with light, which I do personally feel like that's the best case scenario if you're going light anyway. And it absorbs for 1 turn, and it imbues the boss for 3 turns in total, which is very cool in that regard, because if you also do light resistance, or technically speaking any form of resistance, it's fine. And we do have Sylvia on our team, so your team, even if not at 50% resistance, will take minimal damage, whereas with this, it's not that cool. It's just a single turn too, which if the boss does a single turn of high burst, that's fine. But as we've all seen, the current Crumbler boss does have a few turns where he does high damage, and it's not only the threshold attack. So it's kind of iffy, and it also serves to a point to argue that her tanking capabilities aren't that good at all. Now, she does have Shroud of Spirits, which is a 90%, albeit 1 turn, 90% general mitigation. It's strong. Esther has something very similar, but Esther's lasts longer. Though, on the flip side, Esther's Storm Guardian has a 10-turn cooldown, whereas Shroud of Spirits has only 5 turns cooldown. Give and take, I guess. I do prefer Esther's cooldown, even though it is longer until it's available again. But in my case, I never found this to be an issue. I'd rather have 2 turns of huge mitigation than 1 turn from Shroud of Mitigation. 75% cover mitigation is nice. I still feel like just a single... it's her Omni cover, so that is also very important. I almost read this for physical cover, but this is her Omni cover ability in general, and it's just 1 turn, which is totally in line with units such as Jacked or Red Wing Cecil. But looking at the other options, such as Esther and Chow, this yet again is very bad for a global unit. Esther has 3 turns of Omni cover, either on her electromagnetic shield or on her Brave Shifted Limit Burst. Both last 3 turns, it's so much better. Chow also has Omni Cover that lasts either 2 turns or 3 turns on his limit burst. And that's far better, because both units, both Esther and Xiao, can literally spam their limit burst. Esther through counters, and so does Xiao. So Lilith in that regard, she is pretty much a 1-off, a 2-off Omni Cover tank, which doesn't help the party. I feel like if you're going the Omni Cover route, you should have at least 2 or 3 turns of Omni Cover. Otherwise, why bother in the first place? Now for Cecil, because he's a JP unit designed around JP content, that is fine. In Dark Visions, you at best need only 1 turn of Omni Covering. Still, having multiple turns of Omni Covering, even in Dark Visions, is good, because sometimes the bosses do AoE damage on multiple occasions. See the last Vision World boss, the Lord of the Jewels 1000. It had multiple AoE attacks each turn, so 1 turn of Omni Cover, that's bad. If you're going for a turn 3 clear like I did, an Omni Cover that lasts 3 turns would have been preferred. Lilith doesn't have that. So that's another one of these glaring kit issues, and it doesn't end there, sadly, because Unstoppable Corruption is the next level of trolling. I believe I don't have to mention that I really dislike Esther's limit burst in base form that removes all fields and sets up that both party side field with 100 LB damage. While you can play around this by using Esther first and then the enemy side field imperiled such as Tsukiko second, it's fine, you can work around this. You cannot work around Lilith's cooldown though. 130 Imperil to Dark, which is bad in all things considered, especially for a 5-turn cooldown ability. And here's the kicker. It imbues the party with Dark. It only increases defense and spirit by 300%, not 400, no attack and magic, which most of the other units have, that have a supporting role by the way. And then it only amplifies her own damage, and not even by 100%, it's just 60%. Why is it 60% when even trashy units such as Illazul and Pearl get 100%, even though it's rolling? I wouldn't have minded one single bit if this was a rolling 100% amp. But why is Gumi, with these SLB units in particular, so inconsistent? I have no idea why she would be 60% amp. That's not even premium level anymore, that's not even trash level anymore, that's literally dumpster fire tier. Because if you take a look at upcoming JP units, we are now starting next week, whatever unit comes next week, whether it's the Chrono Cross units or Final Fantasy III or Final Fantasy IV, we are starting to have 150% amp units. Sure, those are 150% self amps and only last 2 turns. Point still stands. 60% amp is trash. I don't know why Gumi went that route, even if they say, oh, she's a tank unit in the first place. No, she isn't. Her tanking capabilities are bad, and we'll get to that in a minute when we check out her SLB and LB. And her damaging capabilities are super subpar, which we'll be also coming to in a second. And most of it stems from the fact that she only is 60% amplification. Full stop. There's absolutely no reason for her to be 60% amp. Jacked, yes, he's premium, has 100% amp to his, or does he even? No, he has 50%, I believe. But still, Jacked premium has much higher damage in Dark Visions. Full stop. And what's also really bad about Lilith, and that pretty much bridges the way to the LB and SLB, while she has the tanking role, she cannot use Ject's STMR, because Ject's STMR is non-morale scaling, meaning it doesn't work. The same applies to Tice's STMR, which also has no morale scaling on it, on its identifiers, meaning Lilith, while being the perfect combo of being technically able to equip both Ject's STMR and Titus's STMR, in reality can use neither of those. It's bad. If Gumi wants us to use the latest units in both modes, not in just a single one-off mode that is repeating each month for 2 weeks or technically 3 days until you are done playing with it, they should start buffing or upgrading these STMRs, in particular Jacked and Titus, to work with morale, or give us actual decent alternatives such as the light armor that we've gotten this month for Clash of Wills. While the chainmail is a great piece, it has superb stats and I like what they did, but still, of the 5 pieces we've got, I believe it's 5, or recipes, only 1 is actually usable, and that is the ruler's one. I do appreciate that there is a chain ramp one. Absolutely. Cool idea, I love it. But if Gumi wants us to use anything else other than rulers, we need stuff that is equivalent to things that JP has, such as the Titus's STMR effect, or the Tivus effect, which sounds very similar to Titus, but whatever, or Jack's STMR. I'd be much happier if we gotten dedicated chainmails for, say, tanking LB modifiers with morale scaling, or attacking modifiers, or magic modifiers. There is still nothing like that. Or SPR modifiers. Would have been a much better way. I know Gumi probably doesn't like going full on DPS because it might skew the results, but at this point, with all the power creep going on, I mean, Final Fantasy VII is coming soon, and those units, when compared to today's units, pretty much blow everything out of the water, which also means I'm very curious to see what kind of power spike the next Clash unit in November has, because Cloud is actually a huge step up over what we have now. So that's going to be really interesting, and a unit such as Lilith is pretty much dead in the water next month. So yeah, let's check out the SLB and LB. So the LB, and this is where the next glaring kit issue comes into play. It's 70% general mitigation, it's 70% physical mitigation, which she doesn't really have in her entire kit otherwise, and it is a cover for 70 to 85% mitigation, physical cover, so to say, for 5 turns, while also doing 320x baseline damage with 8x per 2% morale scaling. So 720x baseline modifier for Clash, which is very good, don't get me wrong. But for Dark Visions or anything non-morale, 320x, that's absolute trash. If you use Tivus' Spirit, which you can and should if the killers align, and Sylvie with this, it's still fine. It's not even fine. I wanted to say it's still fine, but it's definitely not. It's just 40x on top, which is 360x LB modifier. That's trash. Like, let me tell you straight up, this is 2021 LB modifiers. The SLB is a total 420x for non-morale fights. So this one reads, it grants tag attack to some abilities which nobody cares about, technically speaking. It is also a self-tag EN frame, which is very cool, and I like that. It is a 250% LB buff and 380x SLB modifier with 8.5x per 2% morale scaling, meaning 805 in total, which is pretty good. It's higher than what Chizuru has. And it's a 75% general mitigation buff. You see what's missing here? Yes. On the one hand, we are missing the cover mitigation. On the other hand, we are missing the physical mitigation. And what's also really bad is if you, for example, LB on turn 1 because you need that physical mitigation and general mitigation because Sylvie, for whatever reason, is A, not on your team, or B, has other things to do, you are pretty much screwed on the first turn if you don't use it. And if you use it on the first turn, she needs someone else to do physical mitigation again on turn 3 because, guess what? It runs out. And that is so bad. So technically speaking, in terms of tanking, it is better to have Lilith at EX +2, which is super ironic. But for damage dealing, it's better to have it EX plus 3 for the higher stats and more damage in general. So again, this whole SLB inconsistency. JP units, ironically, don't have that issue, for the most part, because they do have only one single niche, and that is usually damage, or in case of the debuffer units, it's just that they have higher imperils. So both Olive and Lilith suffer from the same issue, that while the damage is higher at EX plus 3, the turn actions are entirely messed up by being EX plus 3. And that is why SLB units in general are such a bad game design. And I had hopes that Gumi would fix this to some degree, but they only made it worse. Huge thumbs up for that. So yeah, SLB and LB both are bad, full stop. While being good at damage, asterisks. So the rest of the kit is a dumpster fire as well. So the abilities by themselves, 75% general mitigation on demand, some charm and infliction to all enemies, which nobody will ever care about outside of arena, so whatever. Has a 20% kiss of betrayal, that is, mace and peril. That's, I mean, it's 2022, we get units, time limited units in particular, that have 20% mace and perils. Like, let that sink in for a while. Maeve had even better for hammers, and she's so old. I'm at loss for words when I see something like this, TBH. She has an attacker role, so she should have more than that. It's, I don't know. And then her cover ability, Enchanting Seductress. It's 50% physical mitigation. When you consider that her only physical mitigation stems from her LB, which she cannot use consistently because SLB, it's another whole issue, because she now is entirely dependent on other units. Now, sure, she has Unending Nightmare, which is 75% physical mitigation as well for 3 turns. It's 1 use per battle, and clash fights usually last a little bit longer than 3 or 6 turns. So again, still entirely dependent on other units to do the job for her, while being a tank. How is this so inconsistent? Esther is perfectly consistent with herself inside her kit, with spammable abilities. So is Chao. So is fucking Rhonda. What was Gumi smoking? I do have feelings that this is an Alum designed unit where they said, we hate global units, so let's make this unit worse than it is supposed to be. That's just me. Tinfoil hat on. And then there's the passive side of things. Let's ignore the fact that the EX plus 2 and EX plus 3 abilities should have been, or passive should have been baseline. It gets super awkward with her Salty Dream, because that one is a counter ability and it's a morale counter ability, much like Chao. But Gumi was like, yeah, we don't want Chao to repeat itself, so we max out the morale gain by 2 per turn, max 2 per turn. So the best thing you can get is 400% or 400 morale from this, because, and I saw this a lot on the Discord server, people were thinking, oh, if there's 2 physical attacks and 2 magical attacks, I get 2 of both, meaning 800 in total. That's not the case. It's either or, so max 2 out of the 2. It's 400 morale at best. What a joke. Furthermore, that's not on this slide, but you can check it out for yourself on the wiki. She has 250% passive defense out of 400, which forces you, for example, to use her TMR, which is very bad. So let's move on to the TMR and STMR. As you can see, 40% defense and HP is the TMR. The STMR doesn't have it though. The vision card, on the other hand, helps. The global vision card, which is on the next slide, but we'll get to that, is technically designed in a way to cover up her kit inconsistencies, and I hate that so much. So the TMR, 40% defense and HP, 50% dark resistance, and 50% true double hand defense, which again, it is so dumb, because if you use the global vision card like Revellers, you're capping her true double hand defense anyway, so that Trustmaster materia is over capping. Which I hate this unit so much in terms of what they did. SLB units, the huge downside of SLB units is that they cannot shift into a safe form and have to be self-sufficient in their own way by passives, by having massive passives that pretty much easen up the gearing of losing a whole safe form. Lilith doesn't have that, and it's such a headache. And I've seen Cinsor also complain about her inconsistencies and using her in Clash, for even in her own Clash, which is kind of ironic. The Super Trustmaster is straight up trash. It's a 200 mace, already a bad weapon type, with bad variance of 1.4 to 1.6, although I'm not quite sure whether that's actually the case now, because no, it is the case, it is the case. I was mistaking it for fist weapons with 1.45 to 1.65, but that's okay. 600 HP, 66 attack, and 220 defense. Decent stats. 220 defense isn't anything to write home about though. And then it has an auto cast at the start of the turn with 10% MP and HP regeneration of max MP and HP, which is fine, I suppose, but still nothing to write home about. It's a nice addition, but I'd much rather have something like 50% HP or 100% HP or defense to double hand defense, what have you, but not this kind of crap, because Clash of Wills for the most part is very binary in your HP department. You're either at full HP or dead. So I kind of feel like we should go back to the Kairos days where tanks were in danger, but if you did well, they did survive with either very low HP or mid HP, but not be binary, either dead or alive. I don't like that this much. And then exclusive to the Lilith variants, this also applies to the 5-star Lilith, 500 static attack, HP and defense. And the vision card, her own vision card, 1000 base HP, pretty decent, but only 100 base defense, which again is very bad. 50% HP and defense, 50% Demon, Human, Reaper and Stone Killer, Physical, Magical, which is nice, and 500 static defense and HP for FFBE units only at level 10. The card is kind of meh. I feel like it's okay-ish. It's not super bad, but far from being good. It's kind of a whatever card, to be honest. While the TMR and STMR are rather disappointing, especially the STMR for a time limit unit is straight up trash. Now let's check out the Midnight Revellers vision card. You all saw me hopefully pull for that card, and I pulled on it for a very good reason. So let's check out the stats. Still 1000 base HP, but this one has 120 base defense and spirit, which is already cool. It has 500 static defense and spirit, while also providing 150 true double hand defense and spirit, which is very, very good. Also providing 100% Reaper and Stone Killer and 50% Earth Dark resistance for FFBE units. Now the reason why I still believe that this card is very, very good, it's a perfect Omnicover tank card, because it has both defense and spirit, whereas her usual card only has the defense and HP part. This one has 3 different stats, and all 3 stats are very well balanced out. So if you have, for example, Chao, who has to take physical hits as well as magical hits, but has more magical hits, you could put this on Chao, because this is really good on Chao as well, such that he can not die to physical hits, which is nice. On the other hand, for Esther, for example, she is super strong physically, but suffers in magic fights. I put this on my Esther for this fight, and the magic attacks didn't do much. She reached almost 5k spirit, which is perfectly fine for a fight that is focused on physical, but does still some very dangerous magical stuff, unless you completely immune it. Which is why this card, in general, for those tanks who do have decent Omnicovers or good Omnicovers, Chao and Esther in particular, perfect card, best in slot for those units. The killer selection, is good. I mean, if you wanted to go Chow DPS and Brave Shift for finishing moves, it is good. I wouldn't personally use it for DPS, but the option is still there. And Chow is a good representation of units that can use it to decent fruition. But comparing it to strict cards in either department, meaning physical or magical, in terms of physical tanking cards, there's definitely better cards. There's Power Cut, which is the free Dragon Quest card, and there's also Premium Jets card, which is also superior in strict tanking capabilities than Midnight Revellers. Meaning if you want to use this on a tank, on a physical tank, such as Jacked, Randa, or Esther, or Lilith, while not having to deal with any magic damage, non-elemental magic damage that is, yeah, I would probably use Power Cut or Jack's card as well, though I don't have Jack's card. But still, those are better. However, and I find it ironic, in terms of magic tanking, this card is the best all around, because the magic tanking cards that we have, most of them are really bad compared to this. So when I do want to have a magic tanking unit, I'd probably use this all the time, which is kind of funny. Or maybe use Power Cut still. I don't know. Depends on what kind of damage we're dealing with. But I feel like it's a really good magic tanking card and the best Omnicover tanking card. So yeah, a good card. I feel like it's worth 26k, but your mileage may vary heavily depending on what content you're going for. If you are going for mainly Clash of Wills, I would suggest getting this card, but you can totally live without it. You don't need it, it makes life easier, and it's up to you. But I went for it personally because it makes my life easier. I don't have to stress out about turn charts anymore and can just focus on maximizing DPS. Alright, let's get to the nitty-gritty stuff where it gets really interesting, which is damage calculations. I updated my Clash of Wills sheet for the current boss, as well as the stats. So roundabout we are looking at 369,000, nice by the way, defense and spirit, but I believe the actual full value is 400 and something defense and 400,000 something defense and spirit if you account for the passive defense and spirit too. Whereas Dark Vision's visual stuff is unchanged from last week or last week's. So this is the Lilith build for Dark Visions. Dark Visions, it's better to use Sword of Light because it evens up her gearing. And main reason is you don't want to use her TMR for obvious reasons, because you need all the stats for killers. Now, I am using it here because it technically lines up to some degree, or the builder said it is very necessary to unlock her TMR passive. But yeah, Clash of Wills is a different thing though. So yeah, Sword of Light because it evens up gearing quite a lot even. And this one is vetted against Aquatic and Beast, as you can see. And this is where the issues come in. As soon as it's not her innate race types, Lilith falls flat. Using her TMR, which is a materia slot, and clogging up that very important materia slot means she's high ineffective against non-innate races, whereas other units such as Chizuru, Sky, Esther, etc., and those units do not have any issues going for off races because they have lots of free space. Lilith, on the other hand, sadly doesn't. This is her Clash of Wills build, ideally for this very clash, the Crumblia, and she has a obviously very easy time gearing for this. You can easily fit in Tyvis' Spirit. You cannot fit in Tyvis' Spirit in Dark Visions unless you're fighting her innate races, and that's another issue while Lilith is rather bad for Dark Visions. In this one you can also fit in her STMR, still not a good one, but as you can see the defense she reaches is significantly higher than what it does in Dark Visions. And she can also use Hateful Agents, which is Ihana's TMR, which is nice. And ironically, the builder also uses the Midnight Revellers card for her, which is kind of funny. Alright, I also updated Curtain. He got his intrinsic ability. So as you can see, the top one is for the current build, for the current boss. Curtain easily caps out both Stone and Reaper. And the bottom one shows still Curtain's all known issues. Gearing him for true double hand is still very hard to do. And truth be told, a lone swordsman, I'm kind of realizing this just now, lone swordsman in Dark Visions is better for Curtain than his own intrinsic ability. It's so funny that lone swordsman has a 2000x modifier in Dark Vision, whereas his intrinsic ability makes Feral Frenzy only a 1730x modifier, meaning the modifier of his big nuke is still lower than what lone swordsman does. Isn't that ironic? What a failure in terms of intrinsic ability. It's still decent for Clash of Worlds though, but still I find that so ironic. So here's the Dark Vision damage comparison. To nobody's surprise, a 390x LB modifier is trash. So Lilith is just 48.74% of Jack's damage. To nobody's surprise when Jack has such a high LB modifier. SLB modifier, I should say. And comparing her to the number one damage spot, which is Van Harmer at the current time of day, or current time of the game's state, she's only 36% of Van Harmer's damage. And that's really bad for a global unit that is supposedly good in both modes, or usually most global units are good in both modes. Lilith isn't. So the best case scenario for Lilith, if you wanted to use her in Dark Visions, is to initiate chains or killer buffs, which again once per battle, but that's fine for Dark Visions in the most part. Kurt, on the other hand, doesn't prove to be relevant at all. He is just super bad. I didn't even bother checking how little he is, but it's less than 33%, so yeah. He really struggled in terms of gearing for off races. He is better for innate races, but then you're still better off using a tag ENLB chainer such as Lilith, or even better, Chizuru. Now let's check out Clash of Worlds. This is obviously versus the current boss, the Tromblier, and in that case, to nobody's surprise, Lilith performs best because it's her Clash of Worlds. However, unlike Tsukiko last month, Lilith is only 16% or 116% better than Sky. Sky performs very well on this Clash of Worlds, and you've seen her deal tremendous amounts of damage on my 2 runs that I have uploaded, and she is very similar to Chizuru, which is perfectly represented by reality, and thus, yeah, I feel like Sky and Chizuru still do the trick very well. But yeah, nobody can doubt Lilith's performance in this particular Clash of Worlds, but she will have massive gearing issues for non-innate races. Now let's just make a thought experiment. Let's assume for a minute that the next Clash of Worlds is actually near, which I hope it is, because that means there's potential for the near unit to be really good. And if that were the case, if the next Clash of Worlds were to be near Clash of Worlds, we can safely assume it is going to be at least Machina type. Lilith has 0 innates for Machina. Let's also assume the next Clash of Worlds is human. Lilith has 150% innate killer to humans. You are still forced to gear 150% killers to human and have to go from 0 to 300 on Machina, while still capping defense. And I roughly did this calc, and Lilith underperforms heavily. She performs lower than Sky, she performs lower than Chizuru, and is about on par with Beach Blaster Olive. And that feels really bad. And in that case, I wouldn't bring her at all, because we can all assume that if that were the case in this thought experiment, the next near unit would be the best one. meaning the 3 DPS slots or 4 DPS slots would be Sky, the Nea unit, Chizuru, and potentially Esther or Tsukiko if the elements align. Although 5-star 2B, for example, was Lightning, I believe A2 was also Lightning, so if it is Lightning, phew boy, we're gonna have a field day with Sylvie again, but I have no idea if Nier is Clash of Worlds, but everything points towards it, to be honest. Everything really points towards it. So yeah, that thought experiment pretty much shows that Lilith may be very short-lived, just like your average JP SLB unit. And I'm really afraid for those people who went all in for Lilith, thinking that she's really good, that she might only be used for this Clash of Wills and then benched for the remainder of the events. Current, on the other hand, even with this intrinsic ability, it's just 57.84% of Lilith's damage and still worse than Esther, who is showing her age, but she's still a superb tank nonetheless. And Curtin has tremendous gearing issues when he's not fighting exactly Stone Reaper. So yeah, Curtin is not relevant, sadly. And let's get to the verdict. With all the criticism, it is no surprise that Lilith doesn't fare well on with my rating criterias. So she is a 3 out of 10 in Clash of Wills and a 1 out of 10 in Dark Visions, to nobody's surprise, especially the Dark Vision rating. So the good side of things is that she has high damage output in Clash of Worlds. I should put an asterisk in there because the asterisk would be if the killers align. Because if they don't, she's just very mid. She has decent party supports, very good dark resistance buffs, killer buffs, but that's also already it, to be honest. So I really struggled. I wasn't sure whether I should actually give her that +1. In hindsight, maybe no. That would mean she's only a 2 out of 10 for Clash, which would more represent her usability overall. But we'll see. I feel like 2 or 3 out of 10 is still a fair rating for her. And I explain why I went for that route in just a minute. And what that entails in terms of actual worth of the unit. So the bad side of things, very, very low damage in Dark Visions, bad TMR and STMR, and she has glaring kit issues with highly questionable immune trolling and general direction of her kit. So let's reiterate why she has -2 in here. And this also reiterates from what I said half an hour ago. I see how long this video already is. I'm trying to cut it short by now. So only 250% passive defense, which is bad in itself for an SLB unit. I don't mind it if it's on a brave shifted unit. That unit has other issues, other positives such as a save 4, meaning you can totally gear for resistance, etc. in the save form and fully focus on the good materials that have attack on it passively anyway, blah blah blah, you know the drill. Why 250% passive attack or magic is a non-issue for brave shifted units, unlike it is for SLB units. 60% dark, 60% dark imbue only for self, not party. That's a mistake on my end. Very bad, out of date, out of scope. It's not good with what's coming soon, aka next week from JP units. And the SLB and LB mitigation buffs not lining up perfectly unless you're EX +2, which in that case they do line up, but in case of EX +3 they don't, etc. I explained this. And her tanking capabilities are below average, the average being Esther, Chow, Jacked, and the above average being Ronda. Too bad. She's bad in terms of tanking. And another deduction for points is that she only has a 130 in peril and a trash weapon in peril at 20%. I don't know what Gumi was smoking, but that's just ridiculously bad at this point. So what does it mean that she's only a 1 out of 10 or 3 out of 10? A 1 out of 10 means she has a single niche usage. Same applies to the 3 out of 10, but there might be a little bit more usage cases in general than at 1 out of 10. So a 10 out of 10 unit, such as Sylvie or Esther, those units get used every single time. You will always see them. Sylvie is the perfect representation of a 10 out of 10. Sylvie should be an 11 out of 10 even, because Sylvie's in everything. Whatever you do, Sylvie will always be in it, because she's that good. Esther, for the most part, I still use her to this date, and most people still use her to this date, and that's why she is a 10 out of 10 as well. Tsukiko is a 9 out of 10, because she is getting used everywhere ever since her release. Surely, most of the stuff aligns with the 3 elements she has: fire, light, and earth. If it doesn't align, well, okay, you don't need to use her, but for the most part, since she covers 1/3 of the elements, perfectly fine to use, and she will be used most of the time, which is why she's a 9 out of 10. Roberta, still a highly versatile unit that saw lots of play for about 4 to 5 months. That's why she's a 10 out of 10. And I guess I made it very clear why Lilith is not highly rated. Her niche is damage, and that is ironic because the game stage she's a physical tank first, but her tanking role isn't what's good here. It's the damage for this very particular clash, and that is good. But if the races don't apply anymore, you don't bring Lilith, meaning she shouldn't be highly rated and is a niche unit for when the killers align. And you won't have her killers align most of the time, meaning less usage, meaning lower rating. And 3 out of 10 perfectly represents that she is a niche unit with above average usage for those cases, because if you're below average, you're 1 or 2 out of 10. Being 3 to 5 is above average usage for niche units. And if you're 6 out of 10 or higher, you are probably a decent unit all around. And this is why I rated Cecil a 6 out of 10, because he is perfectly fine for every content that is not morale. Meaning trials, he's great in dark visions, he's great for the challenges, for mocking, etc. So Cecil, perfectly fine unit, 6 out of 10, very much represents that he is high usable all around. You could technically use him in Clash of Worlds too, because he fits that all the criteria. He's just not morale scaling, and that's why he isn't that good for Clash of Worlds. But technically speaking, if you just wanted to get done with Clash of Worlds, perfect. Cecil, perfectly fine, and that's why he's a 6 out of 10. And that also represents why Lilith is just a 3 out of 10. Same thing, less usage, more niche. So yeah, Gumi all in all tried to fit in 3 roles with Lilith: tank, attack, and to some degree support, and they failed on 2 out of 3 accounts, namely tanking and supporting. And all in all, Lilith is the perfect representation of why SLB units don't work outside their single niche, and in both cases, meaning Olaf and Lilith, it's damage. And I think it's bad for the game's health if the only niche of SLB units is damage. They can be versatile, they should be versatile, just like their brave shifted companions, but they are not. And until Gumi doesn't learn how to do proper SLB units, those units will never be worth your lapis. It's safe to skip Lilith. You will always fare super well if you just use Chizuru, Sky. That combo should cap most of the fights anyway. And that pretty much closes out today's review. Thank you all for watching. Have a wonderful rest of the Saturday evening, morning, afternoon, wherever you're from. And we'll see each other potentially next week for the next review. Bye bye.